And welcome back to Capital Tonight. We are still months away from the next round of budget negotiations, but supporters of the millionaire's tax are getting ready to be organized. More than 100 people are taking part in a conference in Albany to find out how they should work together and improve their communication skills to push for their goals. One of their top goals is what's known as progressive revenue generation. Okay, in simpler terms, that means ending tax breaks for rich people in New York. Here to explain more about this are some of the participants. We have Allison Sesso, right, from the Human Services Council, Bobby Tolbert from Vocal New York, and then we have Michael Kink from Strong Economy for All. Thank you very much for being here, everybody. So give me an overview, Allison and Bobby, about what's going on today. It's like a boot camp for activists, right?
Exactly. So we've got about 125 participants from across the state. They're advocates, they're activists, and they all are in it to push for a progressive tax in the state. We have the largest gap between the rich and the poor in New York State and New York City. We're #1 in that way. And we're all learning to speak in a common language and to learn how to work with one another so that we're all together in this and we're all fighting and we won't be pitted against one another when the budget cuts and conversations start to take way.
Yeah, because that's been the problem in the past and with all movements is that people are fractured in what they're seeking and they're not speaking. That you want the strength in numbers kind of a thing, right? And when you talk about giving people skills and tools, what does that mean for like an actual person like yourself, Bobby?
Well, being involved with Vocal, we are in the front line of all activism activities and actions and legislation. So all the participants in the boot camp are engaging in local actions in their communities, in their respective communities. However, there is a big picture, there's a big national picture, because these same actions that are going on in New York State are happening all over the country.
Yep.
So we are an inset to a larger picture where actions are going on to develop awareness, and we hope to achieve a common language and a common messaging through this boot camp.
So when you talk to people about that, it's not just about you talk about what to say and what kind of words to use, but also how to comport themselves. Do you do that too? Do you cover that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that everyone is connected to one another so that we can have a solidified movement together. And I also think that it's about, like you said, the language, but it's also about understanding what's at stake and being able to articulate that to the community at large. I think the average person doesn't really necessarily connect to, when they drop their child off to child care, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about budget cuts. That we're talking about, the woman that comes to your house to take care of your elderly mother so that you can go to work. That we're talking about job supports and things like that. And that's the common language that we're really talking about.
Michael, we're talking also about the millionaire's tax or the Buffett rule or the whatever it is that you want to call it. As Bobby mentioned, it's something that we're talking about nationally right now. Can you just fill us in from a policy standpoint about where that is at this moment? We've seen the Assembly Speaker say he was going to bring it back, and he has.
On December 31st, we're going to give a $5 billion tax break to the richest New Yorkers. If someone doesn't stand up and say, wait a minute, this is crazy.
Okay, that's because the so-called millionaire's tax expires, right? The 3-year temporary surcharge, the PIT on the personal income tax will expire at the end of this year.
Exactly. In 2009, New York took a balanced approach, about a third cuts, about a third the federal stimulus, and about a third increased revenues on the highest earning New Yorkers. That temporary surcharge will expire. Speaker Silver has spoken out this fall and said he's in favor of it. The Assembly has sort of historically been in favor of it. The Republican-controlled Senate was divided for a little while. There were some members that had said it wouldn't be the worst thing. Others had been working for it and thinking about it locally. The Majority Leader, Senator Skelos, put the kibosh on that, said we're not doing it. Governor Cuomo, I think, has been pretty straightforward in his public communications about not wanting to continue the millionaire's tax. We think that the millionaire's tax should continue, and that's been part of all these groups' work. It's clear now that the cuts that we've had as a result of not doing the millionaire's tax are taking hold. School class sizes are going up, 30,000 teachers are laid off, over 100,000 public workers have lost their job in the last couple of years, and thousands more in local communities as the trickle-down effects from job losses have continued. So part of the communication is trusted local folks saying, these budget cuts you don't like, they're kind of linked to this. We're taking cuts we're hurting our schools, we're hurting human services, we're winding down services for people who are homeless when homelessness is at all-time high. And these things are linked, that if poor and working people are going to take a hit in tough economic times, it shouldn't be for more tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires.
Do you think there's obviously there's been a lot of attention on Zuccotti Park in New York City. Now we're seeing local movements also sort of occupy Wall Street protests, if you will, spurring around all over the nation. Might there be a time, and I know you guys aren't discussing this, I don't think you are at any rate, that you could envision like a park gets taken over in Albany while the legislature's in session? It'd be awfully cold. But has the tide turned, in other words, that we are going to see more people of the 99% of us, if you will?
Without a doubt. We mobilized 20,000 people on May 12th to protest on Wall Street. And in that participation, there were representatives from every demographic. You know, we had labor unions, we had educational institutions, we had social services, we had a lot of private sector people and public officials who were involved in this, as well as the middle class, who was being shut out of society, so to speak.
You know, before we just continue, I just want to point out we're looking right now at some footage from over the weekend. There were 700 people and change who were arrested in Brooklyn trying to cross the Brooklyn Bridge as a part of that Occupy Wall Street movement. Just the boot camp, do you talk to people about how their nonviolent tactics, about how you engage with law enforcement and the appropriate way to get arrested? I've always wondered about that. We're seeing this footage now. I mean, there's been complaints about pepper spray and stuff, but I've watched people who were arrested last year at the Capitol. They went limp, they talked to the police, it wasn't violent, and then they were released after they were processed.
Well, I would just say it's interesting because from where I'm coming from, the Human Services Council, we represent nonprofits that are providing social services. These groups traditionally haven't been doing this type of work. We haven't been sort of taking to the streets, because we live off of government contracts, and frankly, a lot of these nonprofits have really been just focusing on getting the work done and helping those people in need. I think at this point we're backed into a corner. And I think that that's what has really brought us to the table in a real way. We are recognizing that we need to learn from some of these community groups, and we need to work with them, and that we need to learn some of these skills in order to really make sure that we're adding on to this and getting as part of this conversation.
Our group, the Strong Economy for All Coalition, is working with United New York, the Working Families Party, the Human Services Council, Vocal, and dozens of other groups this Wednesday to organize a community labor march in support of Occupy Wall Street. We're meeting at City Hall in New York at 4:30. We'll be marching down 1,000 strong to join them there. I really do think that these efforts are linked. I think that there's broad public understanding that government right now is working pretty much only for that 1%. We're cutting services that poor people rely on. We're cutting services that middle class people rely on. And what we're doing to fund is more tax breaks for the very wealthy.
That may be. And what does that mean for folks like Andrew Cuomo, who of course is a Democrat, who refused to support the extension of the millionaire's tax, which is, as we mentioned, going away at the end of December unless by some miracle the legislature comes back. The governor has said he doesn't plan to bring the legislature back before the end of the year. He doesn't see that happening. But, with all due respect, you guys put him there. I mean, voters voted this man in, and he wasn't lying during the campaign. He was quite clear. No, I'm going to close a $10 billion budget deficit without raising taxes. I mean, voters wanted that. Constituents clearly wanted that. Now apparently they want something else.
Well, he's trying to balance that act on the backs of marginalized communities and communities who can't afford to support a state budget. The mistakes of Wall Street and corporate entities are their fault. So they're actually blaming us for their miscues. So we can't afford to support the state that way because we don't have any money. There's a lot of talk going on about budget cuts and slicing, but there's no talk going on about creating revenue for services that are needed in communities.
And I think Governor Cuomo, all elected officials, all candidates for public office, they're attuned to public opinion, and I do think public opinion is changing. I think that these marches, the fact that things are springing up so quickly, there were 150 people at an organizing meeting for Occupy Albany last night. We've all been organizing for a long time. We haven't seen this before. You haven't seen all the groups connected together that used to squabble with each other in one unified front. I think that the events on the ground are pushing people to come together.
But you haven't seen a lot of elected official support yet at Occupy Wall Street. I mean, I'm thinking about some of the folks that I would expect. I think Rangel was there. I'm not surprised. Probably one of the most liberal congressional members that we have in the House delegation. David Patterson, no longer elected, went down there to check it out. Not surprised about that. I don't think I've seen, like, Bill de Blasio, the New York City public advocate. We haven't seen Andrew Cuomo. He has a progressive history in terms of social policy, so, like gay marriage, for example, and helping the homeless. I mean, that's how he got his start, with HELP, which was a nonprofit he started. So I'm just surprised and how you translate a movement that's social and on the ground into affecting policy. That's what you're trying to do, is bridge that gap,
And
right?
the most powerful social movements are always ahead of the elected officials. This is way out in front of people, and that's good. I think it's good that people are taking more sharp stands. I think it's good that at the Occupy Albany meeting last night, you had self-declared conservatives. You had small business owners. You said people that, I'm for capitalism, but I don't like corporate welfare. I don't like the way they control our political system. It's really bringing people together in common cause, and I think that is the kind of thing that sweeps elected officials along.
Interesting.
I think that's right. I think that there's a lag. I also think that part of our job is to educate people about what really is at stake. I think that people are angry. They know that the country, the state, the city is not going in the right direction, but not everyone, is a policy wonk and has tangible understanding.
Well, they don't have time.
Right, exactly. So that's our job, right? So part of our job is to keep publicly educating everyone, letting them know specifically what's at stake, and to bridge that gap between that public outrage and having solid solutions and talking to government about what those are.
Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, but if people were interested in getting more information about what you guys are doing, could you direct them to your websites, for example? Is there like a collective website?
So we are, you want to talk about that, Michael?
I think right now the most effective thing is to go to facebook.com/Beyond May 12th. That's the group that, as Bobby mentioned, put together the big march on Wall Street last spring. We're working it together again now. We're expecting in the next several weeks to launch a common website that explains local cuts, that explains progressive revenue options, and that explains investments in jobs. We've got a budget deficit, we've got a jobs deficit. We need to deal with that as well.
And I would just add that Human Services Council has the Who Cares I Do campaign. It's whocares-ido.org, and that has specifically only human services. We're going to add that information in, so there is some information on our website. You want to end with any
personal plugs?
Well, Vocal New York has always been in the forefront of activists, and we're going to continue to involve ourselves in the national campaigns with NPA and the New Bottom Line to have an ongoing series of actions up to the 2012 elections.
Okay. I think that we'll probably be hearing more from you guys. I know there's some labor money behind your organization in particular, and so I'm sure that we'll be hearing more. So Allison, Bobby, and Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks for covering us.